Today, we're going to talk about probably the most basic thing. If you can start to get this and get your head wrapped around the importance of this, it's going to be really the gateway to being able to make food taste delicious, especially when it comes to things like vegetables or making meats not like little pieces of rubber in your mouth, but these delectable, wonderful flavor explosions. The basic motto of our Healthy Kitchen Academy is the unapologetic pursuit of deliciousness. It's not really my quote, it's a quote from Harvard Medical School, from the School of Public Health, where I've done some of my chef coach training, and I really believe in that if it isn't something that you thoroughly enjoy, that you get the deepest experience of pleasure from, then for the most part, most of your meals are not going to be ones that you are going to feel really satisfied from. So pleasure should be a big part of that, and that starts by some really basic things like learning how to cut things appropriately. So you might say, well, why? What's the big deal? Just chop it up, throw it in a pot. You know, if it's a slow cooker and you're going to cook it all day until everything is just mush, well, probably doesn't make much difference. But if you're wanting to do more precision cooking, like you want to make a really good stir fry, then every vegetable has to be cooked. First of all, each vegetable has to be cooked equally, so that you don't have a piece of broccoli that's mushed and a piece of broccoli that's raw. You also have different things in that recipe that have to be cooked at different times and in a way that it comes out just perfect. Every ingredient has to all just kind of explode in your mouth with flavor and with crispness and with the kind of textures that you're looking for. So it starts with cutting things with some accuracy and with some logic. And to be able to cut things, of course, you need to have some cutting utensils, and that starts with at least a couple of good knives. And I would say the most important investment you're going to make as a aspiring chef is going to be a chef's knife. Two main things to think about. There are the European style, and then there are more the Asian style, really more the Japanese style, where you have a knife that's cut to an angle which is essentially like a razor, which is a Japanese knife. It's got a bevel that's about 15 degrees, so it's quite steep, and it means that the sharp edge is very thin for a longer distance, and that leaves the knife much more fragile. But when it's handled correctly and when you treat it right, these knives are amazing. So this is my favorite knife in the world, and it looks really simple. It just is one piece of metal, but it's really balanced. It feels good in the hand, and when I look at the edge carefully, I can see maybe one tiny little ding, so it's never been abused. It's been treated right, and a knife that is a little bit of an investment up front. This is not a super expensive knife, but you're talking around about the $100 mark. I'd consider keeping it simple, and realistically, a European knife is going to be generally a little bit easier for most people. It's a knife that has a 20-degree bevel rather than a 15-degree bevel. So that 20-degree bevel means that there's less sharp area, meaning that there's less thinness to the blade near the sharp surface. So it tends to be a bit more durable. You're going to be more likely to be able to sort of get through some bones with it, or sort of hack things a bit. You don't have to be quite as careful. And then also the sort of garden variety sharpeners that are out there are really mostly designed for the European style 20-degree blade. So unless, here's the thing, if you're going to pick up a Japanese style knife, don't just go out and buy a cheap sharpener and think it's going to work. It's going to ruin the knife potentially. So you have to sharpen a stone or a knife like this, generally with a stone, unless it specifically gives gives you. And there are some, if you went to a knife shop, they would guide you, and you could buy a sharpener that you can either pick the European style or the Japanese style bevel. So it's an important consideration. A knife is only as good as it is sharp. So if you don't keep your knife sharp, it doesn't matter how good they are, they're no good at all. And the thing that I notice when I go over to someone's house and maybe help with dinner is it's actually kind of rare to find sharp knives in the drawer. And it's kind of amazing that everybody spends time cooking something, at least some of the week, but yet very few people stop to consider how important it is to keep their knife sharp. And a sharp knife is where the rubber meets the road, basically. You might think, well, it's kind of scary. I'm kind of scared of the sharp knife. Well, realistically, if you have a sharp knife, you're going to be able to cut with more precision, and you're not going to be using the kind of awkward forces and maybe have, say, a vegetable tip on you or something because you're not getting through it. You're less likely to cut yourself with a sharp knife. But, of course, if you're not using good technique and you have a really sharp knife, you might end up with some missing parts at some point. So it's always going to be safety first. And if you feel intimidated by knives, and that's why you haven't developed your skills, I would highly encourage you to invest in another piece of equipment, which is a safety cut-resistant glove. This is one made by Cuisinart. So I'm imagining that if Cuisinart puts their name on this, that it's unlikely to result in an amputation in someone who is using it correctly. But if you have a glove on for the hand that stabilizes your food, when you're learning your knife skills, you can start getting a much more, I wouldn't say aggressive, but you can start getting more efficient. Because one of the reasons why people don't bother with cutting things properly is they feel like it takes too much time. But what we're going to try to do to convince you that that's not right is that the more organized you are and the more orderly your meal is before you even get started, the easier the whole process is. And so it starts with a good knife, a knife that is balanced, that's comfortable, that has and keeps a sharp edge and maintaining that edge, and then it's about technique. An important companion for a chef knife, because you can see this knife is, it's relatively small. It's not a big, thick knife. It's a bench scraper. And this is a really, really handy additional thing, because once you finish cutting, it's nice to have this to be able to scoop things up, put it into the bowl. Otherwise, you're going multiple times with your knife like this to get things transferred across, or just using your hands, and then it's just a bit awkward. So this is a great investment. Now, that brings me to another point, and that is when if you start to go online and look at how to make Asian food, you'll probably notice that a lot of good Asian cooks, they will use a cleaver for everything. In Chinese cooking, it's almost nothing but cleaver in many cases, and they become very skillful with the cleaver. The cleaver is a remarkable knife. This one has a little bit of a round edge to it, which means you can do, and we're going to teach you this, the typical kind of cut that you get with a chef's knife, rather than just chop, chop, chop. If you have a totally flat blade, you're mostly constrained to going chop, 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 whereas with a more curved blade, it's curved because it's designed to sweep like this. It's really more like a saw, because you're using the, on a microscopic level, you would see almost like the edge of a sharp saw blade when you go to the sharp edge of the knife. It's not a perfectly smooth surface, and so that rough but very sharp surface, when it, say, encounters a tomato, if you just sort of go down on a tomato like this, you'll just go squish. But if you go like this, you're actually sawing through the tomato with these microscopic little kind of defects in the very, very edge of the blade. And that's why I kind of like this cleaver here. It has a little bit of a round edge. It means that when you want to, you can cut like this. When you want to, you can chop, chop, chop. And then it's got the built-in, instead of having one of these as well, you've got this built-in, and that's a really handy thing when you start prepping for a meal. You have your bench scraper built right into it. So, and this is the other thing that I'd highly suggest. I mean, everybody has to have a paring knife, and you can get really cheap paring knives. They're probably fine. Almost the throwaway kinds where you don't even bother to keep them sharp. Just when they get dull, you chuck them. They're $10 or whatever. But it's probably worthwhile investing in a pretty good paring knife. This one is it's a European paring knife, and it's so 20-degree bevel like a European knife generally is, and that means you can use a lot of garden variety sharpeners for it. Just as important to keep a paring knife sharp as it is any other knife, because again, if you're, say, if you've got a paring knife in your hand, you're usually using it like this, where you're turning and pushing, and you don't want excessive forces to be involved so that you end up slipping and having this go through your thumb. If you're intimidated by knives, then you can use a paring knife with a protective glove. And I'd highly recommend that if you want to start getting more skillful and really start pushing the boundaries of how fast you're working and how efficiently is getting one of these gloves is a really good idea. But there are some other tools that I think are pretty well essential for chopping, slicing, cutting vegetables. The thing that I use most often is a pair of scissors. So it's really worthwhile getting some good scissors, essentially kitchen scissors, because there are times when you just want to chop up a small amount of something and you want to do it in a way that's quite controlled and fine. And there's nothing better than a pair of scissors to quickly do the job, like green onions, or say you want a little bit of celery and some soup that you're making like 1 cup off, then scissors are just great. You can just quickly zip through some food like that. Now you can, scissors are not expensive, but you can spend a bit more and get one that's got like a built-in cutting board. I mean, it looks like a really cool idea, but does it work any better than scissors? Maybe. Certainly nice clean cut. So there are times when I use this to sort of zip through some things, but realistically, once your knife skills are up, this will probably sit in your drawer. I wouldn't super recommend this one. If you want to make fine shredded vegetables, finer than a julienne, then you would really enjoy this. You get these at Asian food stores, and the way they work, it looks like a peeler, but look what happens. You go like this, and you end up with these really nice little strips, great for salad, great for stir fry. I use this all the time. To do this with a chef knife, we're going to show you how to do it, but it's a lot more work than what I just did there. And you can zip through a whole carrot in a few seconds. So, of course, you're going to want a peeler, but in a lot of cases, when the peel is quite thin, like say a carrot or a potato, I love these. They're like pot scrubbers with woven stainless steel, I think is what it is, and I just get this under the water and I give it a good scrub, because there's a lot of nutrition in the peel of a lot of vegetables. You don't want to necessarily discard that. You just want to get rid of the ugly stuff and the dirt. And then if there's any little dead bits or something, you can use your paring knife and trim those off, or trim the end off, that sort of thing. So a peeler, but also having some of those pot scrubbers is a really good idea. Another thing that's if you really want to get good at Asian cooking, this is one of the things that I found to be really useful. For instance, you take your onion, you washed it, trimmed off any dead bits, like the ends of the green, and then what you'll do is you'll take your onion, you'll lay it down like this, and you just run this thing along like so. And then when you go through and cut it, you have these beautiful little strips that can be put onto like as a garnish on the top of a bowl or on the top of a soup, that sort of thing. So it's nice when they're really fine like that. It doesn't overpower your taste buds with a big burst of onion. It's just this nice subtle addition as a garnish, and you can chop those up as fine as you want into short lengths if you wish. So that's quite a useful tool if you want to make a lot of Asian kind of food, but really to garnish any bowl if you're using green onions or celery. In terms of grating, there's two things that are pretty essential. One is just your basic tabletop grater like this, and this one has lots of different surfaces. The most common one would be the coarse one. You might use that for making a coleslaw type cabbage. The other one that's very useful is this was sort of adopted from carpentry, I think, for finishing carpenters that need fine. I think it's called a microplane. In fact, oh yeah, actually the name on it is called microplane. Some of them come with handles. This is the cheaper one. It just comes with a protective cover, and then it's a very fine grater. And you can use this for especially like ginger, garlic, when you want to get the zest off of a lemon, that kind of thing. This is a very useful tool. And one last implement I'm going to talk about is the mandolin. And there's a gazillion different mandolins. There's like endless infomercials on the best one. But if you go to chef school, which I did for a little while at the Culinary Institute of America, I learned that every chef in the world must acquire one of these to begin chef school. It is a Japanese mandolin called a benriner. I'm not sure that's the exact pronunciation, but that's how it's spelt, benriner. And it's a Japanese mandolin. It's, sometimes simple and solid is better than fancy, and I have had a lot of mandolins over the years that end up just sitting in the cupboard doing nothing. This one I actually use. Very useful. It comes with 3 different blades, depending on how thick that you want the, this is for making shredded or sliced things. So if you want to say make slices of potatoes and just round even slices, then you would take the teeth blades out and you would just use the flat blade. And then it has a protective, you'd always use this protective tool with little grippers, but I would never dream of using a mandolin without using a protective glove. So we're not going to cover sharpening today, but it is essential that you know how to hone your knife, and it's something you really should do pretty well with every use, or before or after every use. The reason is that a knife that's properly sharpened has an edge that if you were to see it in a microscope, you would see the sharp part is actually very, very thin. And what that means is that as you're cutting with normal use on a proper cutting board, doing everything carefully, eventually what happens is the edge begins to curl, and it's probably kind of like this. There's spots that are curled this way, spots that are curled this way, little jaggy bits start to point away from where they should, and so you don't get the full use of the sharp edge. And that's where the hone comes in, or the knife steel. And there's a number of ways to do this. Chefs, when they're really good at this, they'll probably be doing it more like this, which I'm a little bit nervous of, even though there's sort of like a sword. It's got this thing to protect your hand. It's pretty small. I don't trust myself, to be honest with you, going towards me with a sharp knife like this. So the safest way, they always have a little sharp tip here, and if you have a cutting board already out, before you put your knife away or before you use it, what you'll do is you will line this up like that, and remember, what kind of knife do I have? Is it a Japanese knife? Is it a European knife? If it's a European knife, then you're going to angle it more like this, 20 degrees. If it's a Japanese knife, more like that, which is more like 15. So the idea is that you go down like this. There we go. And you try to get your wrist locked into a position where it's going to hold that same angle all the way through. And there's a certain feel. If you're on the edge, you should sort of feel a bit of friction there and that sound. And you can go multiple times one way, and then you can use the same hand, or you can switch hands. If you're a little bit ambidextrous, it's a little bit easier to do it like this, but most people are not. I'm a lefty, so I'm going to go like this. And then what you're trying to do is to remove what they call a burr, or that curved over edge, and if you're careful, you can sometimes feel a burr that's developed on the knife. This one I hone a lot, so actually there is a little bit of burr still there. So you go like this, and the idea is that it does take a little bit of metal off, but it's mostly just straightening that sharp edge, getting it back to pointing the right direction, so it's going to be useful for you. So you just spend a few seconds doing that. just about every time, and you're going to have a knife that will really stay sharp. And one last thing I want to mention about caring for your knives, and that is to protect the edge. Don't just throw your knives back in a drawer. Never put a good knife in a dishwasher. Takes 2 seconds to clean it by hand under the sink and dry it off and put it away. So be respectful of the edge of this blade. This is a big deal, especially if you have a Japanese knife that's more delicate. And if you're going to put it away in a drawer, buy some edge guards so that you can put them away like that. That is essential. And then one of the things that's a good idea is to get a block to put your knives in, or what I really like is to have the magnetic holder that sits right near your work area so that you can see your knives and you can select them really easily. These magnetic ones are great. Really makes it very convenient, but it also protects that delicate sharp edge that you're trying to maintain.